So, according to Accenture, audiences are bored, and so are the creators. The drive to squeeze maximum value from every marketing pound or dollar spent is inhibiting creativity, with tech, MarTech, playing sort of the taskmaster in all this. Meanwhile, there's a demand from consumers for greater authenticity and emotional connection, which is found less often today in the mainstream platforms. As a result, fan communities and ecosystems have grown in substance and influence. Fans are becoming creators, collaborators, advocates, and investors, taking an autonomous life of their own, providing an opportunity for brands to take advantage of that and build their brand in a more authentic and meaningful relationship. This has led to the notion of human media that must be considered by brands alongside more traditional marketing plans. All of which leads us, these marketers, wondering what exactly is going on? And what should I do differently in terms of my marketing and media spend allocation? Which is focused on our webinar today with our 4 wonderful panelists. I'm Steve Barton, I'm your host. I'm, suppose you could call me a poacher turned gamekeeper. I came up through the agency world working at Ogilvy and then startups like Leonardo. I am now a media owner. I run Just Hands on TV, Britain's finest online tutorials for quilting, knitting, embroidery, and a number of other crafts. If you are interested in a free trial, shoot me a message. That's all you're going to hear about Just Hands on TV anymore. I was also president of the Word of Mouth Marketing Association back in around 2010. And I mentioned that because that was certainly a time where there were a wave of new insights about how word of mouth was impacting purchase decisions and indeed the tech that allowed people to do more to influence word of mouth. And it was of great interest. And I get a sense in the topic that we're looking at today that this is really a next generation step and a fascinating that. So I'll be leading the discussion today, keeping everybody on point and on time. Remember, I am a poacher turned gamekeeper, so I absolutely understand the value of an insight, but I love an insight that has practical footing and commercial implications. So I might nudge you gently back to commercial implications from time to time. With that, I'd like to move on to a quick introduction of each of our expert panelists. I'll start with you, Olivia. Olivia Clarkson, co-founder and CEO of the Super User Group, an agency that specializes in finding super fans to unlock brand growth, powered by passion, fueled by fans, built on science. Wonderful little trilogy got going there. Olivia leads clients into future ways of thinking with a multi-passionate approach that is sometimes crazy, somewhat courageous, but always logical. Olivia ensures that her compassionate two-way communication style propels action and drives results. Welcome, Olivia.
Thank you.
Alex.
Hello.
Hello. Alex, Global Insights Lead at Reckitt, a worldwide FMCG leader that includes brands such as Durex, Dettol, Strepsils, Gaviscon. I think we all know about Reckitt. That's the company he works for. Alex brings an amazing background in consumer insights from Reckitt, and before that, Nielsen. At Reckitt, Alex uses behavioral science and the latest research techniques to ensure Reckitt brands build authentic purpose, impact, and remain the first choice for consumers around the world. He is currently leading Purpose Insights from the Center of Excellence for Insights at Reckitt, where he is responsible for business transformation to drive sustainability. Those are a lot of big words, Alex. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Andy CRYSELL, best known as founder of CrowdDNA. Andy launched and subsequently sold 2 agencies in the last 20 years. You're looking very good for it, Andy. In 2002, RAMP, he launched RAMP, which blended content creation, brand journalism, PR comms, and insight. Back when digital created new possibilities, and it was way too early for overbearing metrics to dominate according to Andy. I think that's a very good point. In 2006, he sold Ramp to St. Luke's, the famous creative agency here in London. 2008, he created Crowd DNA, encouraged his clients to look beyond customers, competitors, and category, exploring culture for opportunities. In 2020, he sold Crowd DNA to Horizon Capital-backed Strat7 Group. I didn't get that right, Andy?
You got that right.
More recently, Alex has been doing mentoring, and as I learned recently, enjoying baseball, which is very welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be here.
And our final panelist is FERN Miller, founder and chief strategy officer at Uncharted. FERN's career in strategy spans creative, consulting, research, digital, product and service design across global markets, in agency startups, and client teams, which is a very long run-on sentence. I hope I got that right, FERN. She helps businesses identify and develop the brands, products, and services that their customers need and want. She helps companies figure out what to say about themselves in digital and real-world marketing. And she helps with different skills, different people come together with their different skills to help her clients enjoy remarkable growth. Welcome, FERN.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, very quickly, here's how things are going to work today. Each panelist has been given a question, one that they are uniquely qualified to comment on. I will read out that question, then the panelists will give us a 5-minute response. There will be followed by a lightning round, which means very quick comments from each of the other panelists on that statement. Then we move on to the next question. If anybody watching has a question while the discussion is going on, please ping them through the chat function on Zoom, and then we'll come to those at the end of the core questions. Then we'll wrap up with a final thought from each of you panelists. Final reminder, let's keep to time. I'll give you a nudge if you're getting a little bit close to the end of the time. And let's have some fun. So first up, FERN. Has technology made advertising boring?
Yes, this is an interesting question, to which obviously with my background, you won't be surprised to hear my answer would obviously be no. There are lots of things that have made advertising boring. And it's actually the first thought that came to mind was that, what's that phrase, a bad workman blames his tools. The things that tend to make advertising boring in my experience are, first of all, fear of doing something new, doing something that hasn't been done before. That will tend to make things boring. The second thing will be a lack of insight, saying things that are not interesting because you haven't understood your consumer well enough, or what they need, or where they are in the world. Another thing that makes advertising boring is norming, things beginning to all look the same and look very similar. And I think to say that it's technology that has done this is to deny responsibility by the industry of using the technology to answer those problems. We've got more opportunities to allay fears of doing something new than we've ever had before. We can talk to customers at a great scale. We can really confirm the model. We can test and test and test again. And that doesn't need to make something boring. It just needs to be listening to people and making sure. We have a phrase in the company of set out without fear. And that's the idea, is that we use data and technology to help companies do new things. I think we also have more opportunities than ever before just to understand and do much more large-scale insight journeys to understand our customers, talk to them at scale, talk to them about new things and more often, to give us insight. If we use that badly, I can understand that it might lead to too much data. But if you analyze it and you take the time to really listen to what they're saying, you'll probably do something very not boring. And then ultimately, when we think about norming, again, that is potentially a function of us using the technology poorly, not to question the data set that we're taking from, not to provide enough analysis and focus when we're looking at imagery, for example, to try and think about new production techniques. We've got more ways to use footage, video, imagery than we've ever had before. It's very lazy not to do that. I think there's more ways to bring stories to life than we've ever had before. There's more channels, there's more places, there's more opportunities, and there's more things for the audience to do when they've seen your work than ever before. They can work with it in you, as I'm sure some of the other panelists are going to talk about, how audiences can respond and discuss and use and connect with you is more interesting than ever before. So there's no reason why technology should make advertising boring. I think making things boring comes from a different source, is what I would say. Ooh.
So it's not tech, what done it. It's about...
And it's also technology is a very broad. I mean, we haven't blamed technology before. It's just, I think people are referring to some sort of, some of the more large scale kind of automated techniques for making advertising that people are nervous of. And the truth is that's the pursuit of efficiency over effectiveness. That's the pursuit of using technology to remove innovative and creative suggestions from the process. And I don't think that that's required.
So I'm going to kick off the lightning round, if I may, with a quick question, and I will come to you speakers. How does this relate to human media? How does what you've just talked through, which made incredible sense, thank you, how does that relate back to enabling, empowering human media?
Well, for example, it is easier than ever to find the customers in our customer base who can be both influential and truly passionate about the subjects we're talking about.
Okay.
So from the point of view of whether technology is making something boring or not, it's the failure to use that to identify your most passionate customers, for example, and to provide ways for them to connect with others and to connect with you at the same time, to really create new messages and new things. It should lead to a real enlivening of the content of advertising, because you're opening up the way that brands are discussed to a much broader set of people. If you look at the brands who are really getting involved in fandom well, you see that they're constantly refreshing their brand imagery, constantly defying the norm. And that's because they're really using those fans, community members, sort of influencers, but I'm using that with a sort of small I, influential voices, and connecting them to people that they find really interesting in the world as well, other sort of artists, cultural influencers as well, and therefore creating much broader set of voices in advertising than we've ever had before. And I think that that's a huge opportunity.
That's great, Fern. Excellent. Panel. I'm going to start with you, Olivia. You're first up on my screen there. Thoughts, reaction to Fern's comments?
Very interesting, thank you. I embrace technology. Yes, totally agree with everything you said. I think I look at it from the flip side of the coin, in the sense of what are we as humans doing to develop ourselves in order to cope with the rate of technology and the rate of how it's moving. And I saw something really interesting the other day, which is AQ. So like we have EQ, IQ, SQ, our ability to, our adaptability, so our ability to remain curious, keep investigating, keep finding new stuff. AQ, yeah, adaptability,
like it.
which is really interesting. You know, brands are needing to have to work a lot harder and a lot smarter to keep consumers and their target audience interested and curious, in order to keep on generating that social media activity and that social content from a UGC and ambassador perspective. So
that's great.
Technology is key, but developing ourselves as humans to enable us to take that technology on at the pace that it's moving at, I think is a really interesting area.
That's brilliant. Alex, your thoughts?
I think if I look back to when I was young, sometimes in the traditional TV advertising space, the adverts were the most interesting thing that was on.
Right.
There was not a lot of choice, and some of that choice was relatively boring. That is no longer the case. I now have a million ways to entertain myself. And if advertising doesn't move forward, it's not that technology's made advertising boring, it's that it's made everything else more interesting.
Yeah.
And you notice those adverts standing out in that noise a little bit more. There are ways to advertise that don't feel like you're being advertised to quite so explicitly, that help to sort of break through that and meld into the world that is the one that's capturing your attention. And that, to me, is how we can continue to leverage technology to avoid advertising being dull.
That's great, Alex. Thank you. Andy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I
Very
mean,
quick.
I broadly agree with Fern. I don't think we should be blaming technology. Technology is there for us to use in good ways or bad ways. I guess there is a challenge at the moment that everything feels so optimized. We can optimize things like never before. That doesn't necessarily encourage risk taking. I think that's what we're facing at the moment. In a way, algorithms have been curating content for a long while now, but now algorithms have the potential to actually create the content, not just curate it. I also think it's interesting. A lot of the adverts people seem to talk about these days are out of home. They're the non-digital things. You know, it's the British Airways advert, the Coca-Cola out of home adverts. Those are the ones that seem to be grabbing people's attentions rather than the digital formats.
Very good. Thank you for that. Andy, I'm going to stick with you. We'll move on to our next question, if that's all right. So there's been a shift in the power balance, with brand fans transformed from passive consumers to creators, collaborators, advocates, even investors. Why? What's going on there, Andy?
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I've had the opportunity to look at fan culture pretty much through my whole career. I was a music journalist way back in time, so it's very important then. Across both the agencies I've run, we've done lots and lots of studies of it. And as I'm sure we'd all agree, being a fan, there's nothing new about that, even though it can sometimes feel like it, the amount of conversation there is around it at the moment. But I think what's changed in terms of why there's a particular interest for brands at the moment in fandom, I think there is a degree of dissatisfaction with some of the more conventional ways of demographically splitting people out into categories and all of the sort of vanillaization that's gone with that. I think there's technology that allows for us to fuel and track fandom in ways that weren't there before. And I think there's just an increased credibility in being a fan of something. You know, there's a growing power in fan communities that wasn't there back in time. Probably worth us just sort of talking a bit about what it means to be a fan. You know, what are the drivers of it? I think that stuff's really important for marketers. There's no kind of one definition of being a fan, but there's talk of it as a interpretive community. So something that has a shared language, a sort of a shared history. There's talk about how fans differ from followers because fans make their interest part of their social identity. And there's also talk of fans having this sort of active, invested interest in a fan object, and that invested interest can mean time, can mean emotion, but it can also mean spending money as well. And the fan object can be anything from, I guess, more conventionally a band, a film star, but it can be a broader passion area, like, you know, an interest in modifying cars or craft, and it can potentially be a brand as well. In terms of why people want to be a fan, there's quite a well-researched set of human needs it meets, everything from belonging to enjoyment, identification, self-esteem, empowerment, connection, learning, aspiration. These are all the kind of human needs that are met by being a fan of a fan object. And when you look across different categories, you can see that different categories can kind of deliver on that more so or less so. As I say, fandom's not new. It's been around a very long time. Some really interesting examples from the past. So one of the first times it was talked about a lot was when Sherlock Holmes was killed off I think it was in the 1890s. Suddenly all these Sherlock Holmes fans were creating their own puppets and coming up with their own stories and developing their own culture around it. Science fiction, probably no surprise, was an early driver of fandom. Baseball, you mentioned that earlier, Steve. Baseball had a very big part to play in fandom, and I think the first time the word fan was used was in the context of baseball. And as you mentioned the other day, gladiators, going back a long, long time before that, there was fan cultures around gladiators as well. But a lot's changed in recent times. Once upon a time, being a fan was something that the media viewed as something to be a bit suspicious about. It was considered a phase, something you would grow out of. But now I think it really is quite different. It really marks you out as being who you are. It's about your identity. You know, you can be proud to be a fan rather than it being this sort of slightly nerdy, geeky thing that it might once have been considered. And within that, I think it's created a shift in the power balance as well. Once upon a time, it was all around the fan object, the star having the power, and the fans trying to get those kind of tiny little moments. But now fan communities, fan ecosystems have grown up, and it's much more about the participation between the fans than necessarily with the fan object. As you mentioned earlier, Steve, now fans can be co-creators, they can be collaborators, they can be advocates, they can even invest now. So a lot of this is driven by technology, lots and lots of different ways for fans to show their fandom. And we also have what we've talked about in our work as the multi-hyphenate fan. So rather than just being a fan of one thing, you might be a fan of multiple things, and you kind of see the overlaps between them, whether that's music and sport and fashion, whatever it may be. There are kind of overlapping fandoms, which I think creates a lot more power for brands that want to be in the fan space. I think my last points really in terms of why I think fandom, while not new, is of particular relevance at the moment. I think there's just some big cultural things going on that makes people want to be fans. You know, this is a time of uncertainty, as we often hear. So you've got to find your stability and your identity somewhere. And a lot of that can be found in being a fan of things. We live in an age of digital democratization where more people can access content and community, and therefore can discover, can learn, and become fans. Once upon a time, society frowned upon these things. Now, having a niche, being unusual, is to be celebrated, and more people want to therefore to show that. And connected with that, you know, we live in an age where self-expression and creativity is viewed highly. So again, it creates this opportunity for these sort of multi-hyphenate fandoms to really grow in power.
Absolutely fascinating, Andy. I'm going to fight the temptation, which is great, to talk about baseball. And I'm going to go back to something you said about the growing power of fans. I found that quite interesting, and I want to nudge it ever so gently close to the commercial area. So this idea of a growing power among this group, and talk to me about how that growing power affects brands, and in particular the commercial reality of brands.
Well, I guess there is something there to leverage, really, isn't there? And I guess we should also be observant of the fact that power can be used very negatively against brands as well, if brands wrong foot in any way. But there is a great power there to leverage. You talked earlier about word of mouth, influence with a small I. I think all of these things are really powerfully amplified through fandoms. And you can do so many things with fandoms, whether using them as your advocates or using them as your co-creators. There are lots of different ways to engage with fans and fandom.
The power of fans. Olivia, let's go quick lightning round. Thoughts following on from what Andy had to say.
I'm going to talk baseball. Have you seen The Saint of Second Chances?
The Saints, yes, wonderful.
Oh yes, yeah. Andy, you must watch it. It's about fandom and baseball. It's a documentary on Netflix. It is excellent.
All right, people.
That's my input.
Back to fandom. The worst fandom growing power. Let's go. That was it. That was your comment on baseball.
Yeah, that was it. That was it for this round.
Thank you very much. All right, Alex, thoughts following on from Andy's comments.
I think Andy said pretty much what I had in my mind, having had some time to think about that question. So just bring it to life for me. Used to be, if you were a music fan, you'd go to a gig, that's where you'd meet the other fans, and there'd be a set piece created by the musician or the band or whatever it was that was controlling the environment in which you engaged. These days, in the online world, you can go to a local meetup about that same band without the band being there, and have a conversation in your local community with local fans. And it's a very different environment and very different experience. And to me, that's just a thought starter as to what's changed in that world, as to how we engage with other fans that create that community of fans.
Fans and a fan object. Absolutely fascinating. Fern, your thoughts?
Yeah, I find this whole area exciting as a marketer and nervous as a fan.
Yeah.
And I think one thing you've got to be, and I'm sure Andy and you touched on this as well, and I'm sure you'd agree. I think one thing that brands should be really careful of is making sure that they're adding to the fans' passion and understanding and cultural relevance, and that when you join, you're listening as much as inputting. There's really good examples of this out there where you see maybe interesting collabs bought with limited edition products and things that the customer can really say, adds to their understanding and enjoyment of their passion point, rather than sort of leaping in and sort of annexing a community, which will inevitably fail, but also will potentially, it can just leave quite a bad taste in customers' mouths for a long time. So that's the thing that I think is really interesting, is finding ways to really add to that and to listen as much as you contribute, I think.
Yeah,
and
I think
be
it's
ethical
really
and
important.
professional as you do that. Sorry?
I was going to say, I think it's really important for brands when they turn up to be useful or entertaining in the context of that fan community. And I think it's also really interesting whether a brand can be the fan object itself, which some can, but that's quite a challenge. The Legos of this world perhaps can. Or are they more about trying to align with other fan objects that are out there?
Fascinating. Excellent. Let's move on. That was really good. Thank you. Olivia, your chance. Here we go. Gen Z has cultivated fan culture, but how can brands stay relevant when these groups are increasingly coming off mainstream platforms and into private groups? Over to you, Olivia.
Thank you. Steve, you said at the beginning that we were all uniquely qualified, and as you can see, I'm no Gen Z. I have a curated point of view as a result, and I mentor a handful of young people, so I've had various conversations with them around this area. I reference a few research papers, so perhaps we can share a reader's list at the end of the webinar. But I think firstly, let me start with a level quote. David Jones, the CEO at Brand Tech Group, said, mobile phones made us all creators, and Gen AI has made us all ad agencies. And I think it's really interesting that especially in the last 5 years, we've seen this real technology shift. Creative tools on social media have become democratized. And I think this has really enabled the younger generation to become their own media channels, much like you, Steve. Some of them, sometimes they're called creation generation, which was coined by Zoe Skaman, who I fangirl over daily. We call it humans who create stories, and that is human media. I think at the same time, this kind of constant hunger of the younger generation to be online all the time, creating content, narrating their life, rather than living life, has kind of created a vibe where there is a real desire for real connection. So I work with a phrase called social out, community up. And it answers questions like, how can brands connect with their most passionate consumers and amplify that content on social channels? How do brands connect with consumers' passions and connect them to their brand values and products? So, what Fern was referencing later, that it's got to be fan culture and fandom that aligns with the brand and not just for the sake of it. And how has this move to more interest-based groups affected really how brands can target their consumers? And there was a brilliant report done by ArtRival recently, which was published by Vogue Business, on how Gen Z have broken the marketing funnel. And there has been a considerable shift from the traditional triangle funnel, awareness, engagement, action, to a more circular movement, which is continuous inspiration, exploration, driving to fan-based community, and from there driving young people to have a desire and therefore take action, buy into a brand or buy a product. So the new funnel looks far more like a loop than it does a triangle. And I think brands that are really creating seamless experiences within the realm of these touch points, building a world, building a universe, building a fan community, are really creating that fan culture in a really expert way. And I think this was demonstrated by TikTok's recent campaign, whereby the insight was that people are no longer going to Google for search, they're going to TikTok, and hashtag it starts on TikTok has now had over 1.9 million posts on the channel. So really amplifying how people are, how young people search behavior is moving off traditional platforms and onto more social media platforms. And I just want to touch on a really brilliant organization that I came across recently called Uni, YOUNI. And a young girl at the age of 14 came off social media for 10 years, which I just think is incredibly brave in itself. And 10 years later, she started an organization where she connects university organizations in real life and takes those experiences, creates fandoms, and then amplifies that content on social media. So a brilliant example of creating a universe and creating a fan culture from a younger generation. I think as a result of this, the brand metrics are shifting from share of wallet to share of life. So this means that brands are expanding beyond just selling products. They actually are asking young people to become part of their ecosystem. You know, and then, you know, that provides products, it provides services, it creates experiences, and brands that are really providing these seamless experiences are where they are maximizing on share of life. So I guess, what does all this mean for brands, which is my final point.
What does it all mean, Olivia, for brands? Yes.
What does it all mean? It means that they need to really start future-proofing their communities. So it's not about infiltrating those closed spaces, it's about building their own. So building their own brand-friendly, future-proofed private communities that are really fueled by the passion of young people who truly believe and truly have built the brand values with you. And I think with all the disruption in social media and the increased sensitivity around privacy, brands will probably need to work much harder and much smarter to build and nurture those fan-based communities for young people, not just sell a product, but to actually create a space that, you know, fosters and nurtures ideas and networking and builds trust.
Olivia, that was fantastic. There was a lot in there. Alex, over to you. Your thoughts.
Right. Super interesting from Olivia there. I really think that these communities are going to keep popping up, and they're going to keep being, to a degree, closed as well. But the community that's about, let's say, again, my band example, band A or whatever it is, community A and community B about the same band, the one that's using all the right assets, the official interest, the right merch, all that kind of stuff, is going to be the more successful community. So providing these communities access to those resources, that brand world that they're creating around it that Olivia was referring to, is exactly the way to make sure people can use your things in the right way, even without you having oversight that they're doing it in the right way, by providing them that right capability so they can do so. I think that's the way you have to think about that, to keep your foot in the game, as it were.
So should brands be nervous about that?
I think giving over
that control.
Brands should be nervous about change, always. And this is big change, and brands should be nervous about that. But nervousness doesn't mean it's a problem. It's an opportunity, and it always is when change is happening.
I think it's about embracing it, and I love that test and learn approach. Like, do something small, pilot it, test it, see what works, see what doesn't work, and then build out. And I think that's where all the best communities. I mean, that's how Glossier, the makeup brand, was built back in the day. So,
in which case, let's come on to you, Fern. You spoke about test and learn. What are your thoughts following on from what Olivia had to say?
I think it's spot on that to identify the fact that increasingly people are trying not to talk to brands in these places. And, you know, I think my own daughter's 14 now, and she has put limitations on her social platforms because she's concerned she's spending too much time there. And we are seeing that trend a sort of broader way as well. I think we're dealing with a generation who won't be sold to. And my sort of, I suppose it's maybe it's a bit glib, but what I would say is fan communities are there for the fandom, for each other. And again, it just comes back to that thing of It's sometimes you need to facilitate, add, and get out of the way of the communication, which is presumably between them. But what I would say is, and it relates to a question from the audience, which came up as well, which is this idea of there being boring brands that can't get involved in fandom because you might not be a fan of it.
I'm going to hold you there, Fern. We're going to come on to questions from the other people in a sec.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess, so my only thing is there's a connection there slightly with this question, which is there will be a way you can help in these fandom spaces, no matter where you are, but it's about sticking to your lane and not getting in the way of perhaps the fandom itself.
Fantastic. Andy, you've been watching these things evolve in the communities for a while now. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think to go back to my earlier points, it's really important that brands do not think of their communities, their fandoms as islands. They do need to think of them in the broader context of all of the other fandoms that people may be involved with, and look at the overlaps there. That point around handing over control, it's obviously it's a hot potato for brands. I think it's been really fascinating looking at how the luxury category has handed over some control in the last 10 years. If luxury can do it, then kind of anyone should be able to do it. I also think it's important that brands are making just the right kind of future-proof markers. I saw that Dove came out, was it yesterday, and said they're never going to use AI to create or distort women's images. I think it's those kind of markers that are going to resonate extremely well with next generations.
Great. Let's move on. I've just got a note that we need to close by 1:15. So, and I don't want to miss out on any more discussion. Alex, I want to come on to you now for your question. Is working with superfans a better model for brands who struggle to get their story heard?
Thank you, yeah. All right, for a moment, I'd like to ignore the question and forget about whether people are superfans or not. I'll stick to my timing, don't worry, I promise. Forget about whether people are superfans or not. The reality is that we're all very social people. Look at fashion trends over time and how we follow in that space, or hairstyles. Who could have imagined that the mullet would be in now? But yet it is. And if people are following in that context, we want to stand out and have our own unique identity, but we also want to be part of that wider society around us. I live in the Netherlands, and that's a saying that exists here. Doe normaal. It basically means be normal. It's a part of the culture to not stand out too much. You can be unique, but it also that speaks to the immense desire we all have to fit in as well. So what does that mean for branding and marketing? Well, as we've spoken about before, traditional advertising loses some of that relevance. There's increased focus on getting your message out there through new ways. And we see things like product placement coming up as a way to get your brand into people's eyes without it being so explicit. Product placement often shows products being used, and that is powerful. And let me take a moment to explain a couple of reasons why I think that's so powerful. I have an education in neuroscience, a background there, the understanding of what makes the brain work. And in this field, there's a type of cell in the brain called a mirror neuron. A mirror neuron is a neuron that fires both when you do something or when you see someone else do that same thing. So when a person do something that you watch, it triggers the same brain activity in that part of the brain as though you were doing it yourself. It's subconscious, but real. And so when you see that happening, you're subconsciously acting out the same thing yourself as well. And what better way to get someone ready to use your brands or products than having the brain imagining it already is at a subconscious level by having you seeing others doing it. So seeing people doing something is very, very powerful. And then we scale it up. In my role at Reckitt, I'm building capabilities and using behavioral science as a toolkit for driving consumer behavior change. One area of application that could be there is about driving more sustainable behaviors, something that's very critical in the current times. Last year, there was a big scientific meta-analysis published on how we can intervene to drive behavior that can mitigate climate change. For anyone interested, Bergquist et al. And think about things like educating people on the need to be more sustainable versus appealing to them to do specific sustainable actions. Or maybe you give financial incentives. And this meta-analysis looked at what was most impactful. The second most effective tool was what I just said, financial incentives. I'm not surprised to hear that. Money makes the world go round, and sustainability often costs, unfortunately. So not surprised at all. But ahead of that, number one, top of the pile, the most effective thing in driving these sustainable behaviors was social comparison, highlighting other people's sustainable behaviors. We want to fit in and we want to be seen to be doing that. 59% of millennials say friends influence their brand purchase decisions, for example. So at last, I bring this back to the superfans question that we began with. I promise I will. This is about groups of people doing things already that we want others to do. We want the superfans of our brands to be used to create more fans, more people doing these things. And the way our brains work, as I just described, if we can leverage superfans in showing what they're doing, there's incredible power in spreading the story in that real and authentic way, to understand that emotional power as to why they became super fans, but also just to show them simply doing the actions is a powerful tool for us to create movements and activities like that. We aren't making people do stuff. We're leveraging that reality of us as highly social individuals to help people make those better decisions. So to close, for brands that are struggling to get their message heard in that changing landscape of advertising, we can rely on the fact that we will continue to be social and that we will always want to fit in, even though we also want to stand out. And this will continue to be a powerful way to get your story heard, even as the world around it changes.
Fantastic. A quick comment, and then we'll move to some questions. We're literally, that was really interesting. I'm sorry, I would like to hear you guys talk for about another hour. So, and I know that there will be follow-on sessions. So if you are following this or watching a recording, know that there will be other sessions, and do look for that. But quickly, starting, Olivia, thoughts?
The neuroscience piece is so interesting, Alex. But yeah, very interesting. I don't have a thought.
Okay. Third.
Sorry?
Anything to add, Fern? Very quickly.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm no expert like Alex is, but the bit of that I found very interesting is this idea of seeing people like us, people like me doing something and having a sense that it's part of my world. And I think that's such a fascinating idea, particularly connecting it with better climate behaviors, and has given me a lot to think about.
Andy.
Yeah, really interesting, Alex. Two-way relationship, I think, is one of those overused expressions in marketing, but I think it's really important to consider with super fans. They can do a lot for your brand, but you need to do something for them as well. I think there needs to be that kind of reciprocal relationship considered.
Excellent. All right, quickly, on to a question. I find this one interesting was, how do you ensure that fans are real and not bots, trained to cheer up a brand or product, or indeed, fabricated or manufactured stuff, or AI manufactured stuff? Discuss. How do we, will there be a national organic system to prevent that, or do we need to look at means to cut that out? Andy, we'll start with you and work our way back.
I've no idea. It's outside of my skill set, frankly, how we deal with bots.
Okay. Alex.
I think the bots are going to get more and more sophisticated over time because of what we're seeing in AI. And as an individual, I'm a little scared of that question because I think it's a really good one. I think that where there's a will, there's a way, and we will find the tools and the capabilities to let us do it. But you can't ask me to tell you what they are because I am not sure for myself.
Fair enough. Fern, your thoughts on that question? Well,
I have two thoughts. The first is, I think you need to figure out where the risk is in that, because it sounds like the challenge, is the risk that there are bots there cheering up a brand or product? What are we nervous of? I think from a brand point of view, the risk of bots infiltrating communities and starting to spread ideas or thoughts that we're not part of is part of our sort of community management discipline, and we will need to get better at that. From the fans' perspective, and this is probably a bit wild, but in the longer future, I don't know whether they'll care.
Okay. Olivia, any final thoughts on that?
It's an excellent question. No final thoughts. is my answer, because it's complex, right?
Well, look, we are out of time. I'm getting a note that says we're running out of time. So thank you all. It was a fascinating discussion. I really would hope that we can carry on having this discussion. Wonderful points, really interesting next wave of development in this space. Thank you again. I'm sure I join everybody who's been watching you. Thank you very much for your thoughts and input.
Thank you.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.